Welcome to AINdebrief, where we take a look back at the most important aviation stories of the past week by the AIN editors who covered them. I'm AIN Alerts editor Chad Trottvetter.
This edition of AIN's Debrief podcast is sponsored by Farnborough International Airshow Connect, coming your way from the 20th to the 24th of July. This virtual program will bring 5 days of high-quality content, collaboration, thought leadership, and industry insight, connecting the global aerospace industry online. The FIA Connect program is free to attend and will include features such as webinars, downloads, and insightful information, providing support to the industry at a time when we cannot meet. Organizers are taking highlights of the Farnborough International Airshow, including the Fin sessions and the Meet the Buyer program, and they're bringing them online to you. To register for your space, visit connect.farnboroughairshow.com.
In this week's episode, the show must not go on. NBA cancels its annual convention due to COVID-19, and AIN's senior editor Kerry Lynch has all the details. Editor-in-Chief Matt Thurber discusses Boeing's long road to get the 737 MAX back in service. Kerry also explains what Bombardier's Global Environmental Declaration for the Global 7500 really means. London-based editor Charles Alcock outlines the plans for a virtual Farnborough Airshow this month. And he also highlights Airbus's testing of autonomous flight technology on an A350 widebody airliner. And finally, Wichita-based editor Jerry Siebenmark covers OSHA's proposed $13,000 fine against Textron Aviation due to a manufacturing plant accident in December. So on Wednesday, NBA made its final decision on the 2020 NBA base show. So what was the decision, Kerry?
Well, Chad, MBA made the extraordinary decision to cancel its crown jewel, the 2020 Business Aviation Convention and Exposition that was to be held October 6th through 8th in Orlando this year. And they said they've already begun working with their exhibitors and everybody involved to refocus for the next event, which will be held also in October in Las Vegas in 2021.
So is this the first time that the NBA show has been canceled? And how many shows have they had since the start?
Chad, to my knowledge, this is the first one that has been outright canceled. This was supposed to be number 73. So that, again, it's an extraordinary decision because that's a pretty long run. But however, I must caveat that after 2011, they did have to cancel the show held in New Orleans, but they did reschedule it and bump it to December of that year.
That was because of 9/11, which happened just a few days before the September 2001 show, right?
Right. And in this case, this is obviously, there's a number of factors weighing into it. I think they were hopeful of holding it. And up until very recently, by all indicators that I had received and everyone else here at AIN, that it was full steam ahead. But the number of exhibitors look to be lagging behind recent years. As a matter of fact, they usually get about 1,000 exhibitors or somewhere upwards of that. And by this time, there were only a little more than, I think it was 547 or right around the 550 mark. And Textron Aviation had already made the decision not to exhibit. So that's a pretty major exhibitor to pull out. But more importantly, the coronavirus continues to spike, and particularly in Florida right now. And there are a lot of new restrictions that are starting to ripple through the country, and it was going to make pulling off an event like this extraordinarily difficult because there's no predictability on what may or may not happen. In fact, right now, the Florida Department of Health had issued an advisory recommending against events with 50 or more people. Well, NBAA attracts something upwards of 30,000. So that makes it a little hard to comply with, no matter what the best of intentions are as far as health and safety precautions such as one-way aisles and some of the other things MBA was looking at. And MBA did hire a very knowledgeable health safety expert to help guide them through the process. But between, the attendance and the exhibitors and the unpredictability and recent rolling restrictions, I think they decided to err on the abundance of precaution. And in the release, Ed Boland made a note that the whole reason MBA was founded in 1947 was to promote safety. And so making a decision like this goes to the heart of what MBA is about. Now, having said that, I'm sure this was a very serious decision for the association because it is a significant part of its revenue. And MBAA had already done a layoff of staff. And it's just going to hurt the association overall. And, hopefully they'll get strong support going forward.
Yeah. Did they say anything about a virtual show as a replacement, or they haven't talked about that yet?
I haven't seen anything about that yet, but that doesn't mean that they won't go virtually. They get so much material in all these shows that they have been packaging a lot of it and putting it online. And of course, we've been talking about what they're doing in Farnborough with Farnborough Connect. And so that sets a template for these kinds of shows.
Well, it's going to be tough, but I think in the end, it's probably the right decision. So there's always 2021, right?
Well, and that's what they've said. They said they're immediately beginning work with exhibitors and others to begin preparations for next year's MBA base. All
right. Thanks for the update, Kerry. So, Matt, the FAA said that Boeing has started flight testing this week with the 737 MAX. So what's going on there?
So, yes, Boeing has resumed flight testing of the 737 MAX to test the new software design to solve the problems that were related to the crash of two 737 MAXs in 2018 and early 2019. And the fleet has been grounded since then, so this is a fix that is going to lead to the ungrounding of the fleet shortly.
So what did the FAA say? What's going on? How long will flight testing take?
It's hard to say because there's really no clarity on that. But the first flight was on Monday, and they're going to have to conduct more flights with FAA flight test engineers on board and see if there's any issues that need to be resolved. So it's hard to say how long that's going to take.
Yeah, and I think part of the congressional intervention in this is that they want to see Boeing include airline pilots and a wider scope of pilots in flight testing. Is that going to happen with this?
Yeah, Boeing really hasn't said much about this at all, but the situation is somewhat unique because many of the other countries with airlines that operated the MAX are doing their own investigations and are going to want their own pilots to fly the airplane and take a much more active role in this recertification process. So the FAA is just one part of this.
Okay. And the DOTIG this week also released a document about the 737 MAX. And what do they have to say about it?
Well, this is a really interesting document. The Department of Transportation Inspector General today released a document that is a timeline of the certification process of the 737 MAX. And it doesn't come to any conclusions, but it's kind of like a factual report on an accident where it just lays out the information. And there's a lot of interesting material in this report. And I'm sure there's going to be more from the Inspector General's office later on. But for anybody interested in what happened to the MAX, this is a really good foundational document showing everything that started in 2012 and took place in the certification process.
Did anything jump out at you? What was most interesting to you, Matt?
Some of the interesting things were that the report, and this is not really anything new. We've seen this reported before, but the report documents it pretty well and talks about how the unique maneuvering characteristics augmentation system in the 737 MAX was really not very well highlighted to FAA certification personnel who were responsible for overseeing the process with Boeing. One interesting aspect of the report is that it outlines that Boeing's system safety analysis did not assess the risk of MCS problems as catastrophic. So Boeing engineers designed that maneuvering characteristics augmentation system to rely on data from just one angle of attack sensor. Interestingly, the report points out that Boeing has used this MCAS system before in the military tanker version of the 767, which is the KC-46. And in that airplane, MCAS relies on information averaged between two angle of attack sensors. And that is actually going to be a feature of this MAX recertification.
Interesting. All right. Thanks, Matt. Kerry, let's jump over to you. This week, Bombardier said that the Global 7500 got an environmental product declaration. What does that mean?
Well, Chad, that is a document that details all sorts of environmental information about the aircraft. It is an environmental product declaration is cataloged by a Swedish organization called the International EPD System. And basically it is a validated, verified document that meets ISO standards to say our product will leave this kind of imprint on the environment, and it documents it from the design stage to the end of life stage. So it's an effort of Bombardier to become very transparent about the imprint that the Global 7500 will have on the environment. And this is kind of important because business aviation has to be transparent because it's constantly under assault from environmentalist groups for transporting fewer people through the air and having so much emissions and noise. And, there have been efforts, particularly in Europe, to try and curb business aviation operations. And there's also the perception issue. So Bombardier Aviation President David Khalil has been very, very active on the environmental front. In fact, he leads GAMA's environmental committee. And, they've been deeply involved in issues such as SAF and other sustainability issues. So he's taken the lead, and the Global 7500 is the first business jet to receive such a declaration or to go through the process to develop the declaration. And it delves into details such as CO2 emissions, noise, water consumption, and other impact indicators. It looks at what Bombardier did from the design stage to how they factored in the manufacturing stage, all the way up through the end of life stage, and Bombardier's goals for recyclability of the Global 7500 once it's at the end. So it's kind of an interesting development. And one thing I noticed today is that NBAA actually wrote about this on its website. So it shows the significance of having this kind of environmental accountability is to business aviation.
It sounds like they'd have to do with new products going forward because of the design aspect of the certification, right? They couldn't just go back and do like the Challenger 350. They would have to develop a new model and have to go through the whole thing from design stage all the way and then project it all the way out to the end of life, right?
Yeah, yes. I mean, I think it would be prohibitive data collection to be able to retroactively go through one of the older Learjets, for instance, and figure out what they did from the design stage to. So really, for newer aircraft, this is far more possible. And since Bombardier factored into every stage from the beginning of this program to now the environmental impact, it was easier for them to pull together, although they'd probably laugh at my use of the word easier because I'm sure this was no small undertaking, especially since it was the first business jet. No such declaration has ever been made before. So they had to really work with the organization, the International EPD Systems Organization, to pull this together. And it could be the template and used for future business aviation products.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thanks, Kerry. Charlie, let's just go over to you. Farnborough International Airshow, obviously they're not holding the in-person air show later this month because of the pandemic, but they just announced that they're going to do a virtual show during that week. And just tell us a little bit about what they said they're going to do.
Yeah, it's a fascinating initiative. As you said, in 3 weeks' time, you and I and just about everybody else in the world who scratches a living in the aerospace industry was due to come to the United Kingdom to attend this show. COVID put a stop to that. But in the very week that the show was supposed to happen, in other words, the 20th through the 24th of July, the Farnborough International organizers are putting on an online event called FIA Connect. And it's a very, very busy program of webinars and conferences covering most aspects of aerospace, heavy emphasis on sustainability and environmental options for aviation in the future. There'll be some defense discussions about how the industry can recover from COVID. And it will also online give people the opportunity to sort of connect with each other directly through the so-called Meet the Buyer program that gives people a chance to talk to prospective partners and customers. And they'll also have their usual Farnborough Friday event where they encourage young people to come and learn more about careers in the industry. So credit to the organizers. It's not the same as us all getting together in a rainy field in England, but it is nonetheless a brave effort to keep the show going.
Is there a fee to go and join the sessions, and how do people get on to do that?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely free. And you just go online at connect.farnboroughairshow.com. And in fact, you'll find that on our website, and you can register for free and participate in, as much or as little of the program as you want to.
And actually, the Farnborough International Airshow, the parent organization ADS, also released some data this week about airliner deliveries. So what do they have to say about that?
Yes, it did. So ADS is the UK Aerospace and Defence Trade Association, and they track civil aircraft deliveries around the world. And don't fall off your stool with surprise, but it turned out that the month of May, saw the all-time lowest number of airliner deliveries on record, with I think it was just 28 aircraft delivered. That's, of course, far less than in May 2019. Now, it's not all bad news, because overall the total backlog has, to some extent, held up surprisingly well. It's just under 14,000 airliners. And that's partly because there haven't actually been a huge number of order cancellations so far. And similarly, because relatively few aircraft have been delivered, it hasn't changed the backlog total very much. Now, to some extent, these figures represent the industry in a state of limbo, meaning some airlines didn't take delivery for no other reason than it was physically impossible to do that, to actually process the delivery. What's going to be far more telling in the coming months is whether we see a higher number of order cancellations and the deliveries still at a very low ebb, because, of course, there's still extreme uncertainty about how long it's going to take air transport to even begin to recover from COVID-19. And we'll actually have a lot more reporting on this. I mean, in the build up to this special FIA Connect event, AIN's going to really boost its aerospace and defense coverage. We're going to have special output during the week of the event and kind of a mid-year snapshot of how the industry's doing.
Okay, great. Actually, let's stick with the air transport theme and talk about Airbus, Charlie. They did some autonomous flights this week aboard an A350. Can you just tell us what they're doing with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the flights that they've done on the A350, and that, of course, is a large wide-body airliner, the sort of thing you would fly halfway around the world on, is just the culmination of a 2-year program of autonomous taxi takeoff and landing tests. And they've been handling this in different ways, but the common denominator is it uses vision-based technology, so kind of a mixture of sensors and cameras that essentially see what the pilot would normally see and much more. And with some very, very sophisticated software, these data inputs are able to essentially tell the aircraft what to do. And as I say, it culminated in half a dozen flights in the A350. Each one of these sorties were 5 or 6 landings, something like that. So there've been something like 30 landings and takeoffs in a wide-body airliner with no pilot involvement. There were actually 2 Airbus test pilots in the cockpit just as a backup. And the lady from Airbus who gave the press a briefing on this said that the hardest aspect of the test process was convincing the pilots not to touch anything, which I guess is, old habits die hard and that sort of thing.
That reminds me of the old joke I heard a long time ago when I was at college about the airliner of the future had one pilot and had a dog in the other seat, and the dog was there to bite the pilot if he tried to touch anything. So
yeah, that's exactly right. I'm looking at a picture of the cockpit there. I see no dog. I do see 2 pilots looking kind of a little bit nervous and underoccupied.
So what's Airbus's goal with this? Where are they going with this? What's the deal?
Well, I think they're going in all sorts of directions. So the thing that piqued my interest, it won't surprise you to hear, is, of course, Airbus is one of the contenders in this exciting new eVTOL urban mobility market. And it's known that they are, working on some eVTOL designs. And eventually they want that aircraft to fly fully autonomously. So some of this learning will go into that program. But it's not just that. Different aspects of what they've learned about autonomous capability could be used, I would say, incrementally in more conventional civil aircraft, meaning, some aspects of flight might be handled autonomously in ways that would reduce pilot workload and add extra degrees of safety. And of course, one of the questions it begs, and I know it must be on your mind, is this leading to, for example, single pilot operations of airliners or even no pilot operations? I don't think we're even close to no pilot operations in the airliner sector. But I don't think it's inconceivable that single pilot operations are something that Airbus and others have in mind here. And of course, then the backup would essentially be the autonomous controls or vice versa.
And I imagine it also could help with long range operations where they have multiple crews. You could almost have 2 crews for takeoff and landing, or a 2-person crew for takeoff and landing. But during the middle of the flight, you could have a 1-person crew with the automation helping, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. It opens up all sorts of new possibilities, not just in terms of efficiencies, but also, extra safety backup. And, they're really taking this seriously. And of course, Airbus this week announced some pretty severe cuts. As far as I can tell, they're not planning to reduce spending on this aspect of research and development.
Okay, great. Thanks, Charlie. Jerry, so the U.S. OSHA, which is which oversees safety at workplaces, proposed a fine against Textron Aviation for an explosion at their Plant 3 in Wichita in December. What happened at the plant in December?
Well, it was a pretty serious explosion. In fact, you could. I live about 7 miles away from the plant, and I heard and actually sort of felt the compression of that explosion, and apparently it had something to do with the autoclave, with one of the autoclaves there in the facility where they do a lot of composite fabrication.
So what happened? It was so did the autoclave explode?
That is my understanding, and to the point that I've been told unofficially that it literally blew the one end of the autoclave or the door off and shot it across the parking lot there, and it resulted in some serious structural damage to the Plant 3 facility.
Yeah, and the autoclave has to be pressurized, so that would be why it would have an explosion possibility. Initially,
we were being told that it was possibly a breach in a 3-inch line that was carrying liquid nitrogen to the Plant 3 building, but this looks more to be in line with the OSHA fine. This looks to be more in line with honing in on the autoclave itself.
Yeah, in the OSHA, the proposed fine had some comments with it, and it talked about injuries. And actually, let's mention the amount of the fine. It's about $13,000.
Right, and the $13,000 fine. I mean, I've been covering businesses for a long time, and that's a $13,000 fine for a company the size of Textron, and that's pretty much a sort of a drop in the bucket. That's not a big fine at all, and a lot of times these proposed fines they're sort of negotiated down. But there were 15 people that were 15 people. Employees who were injured and had to be transported to area hospitals. And according to the list of injuries from OSHA, they involved amputation, broken bone, concussions, lacerations, crushing injuries. So it seemed like it was a pretty significant event.
So, without a working autoclave in Plant 3, what has Textron been doing?
They have been. Scott Donnelly, the CEO of the parent company, mentioned on the last earnings call that they were using some autoclave capacity at Spirit Aerosystems, which has most of its plant facilities just a few miles away. I did speak with the folks at Textron this week, and I understand that actually there's a number of autoclaves in that Plant 3 facility, and some are back online, and others are still pending coming back online, is what I'm told.
Is Plant 3, the structure Plant 3, is it all fixed, or are they still working on that too?
They're still working on it, although if you look at it from the outside, it looks like it's all been repaired. Of course, I'm not privy to the inside of the facility. So, repairs are still underway, and they're expected to be completed early next year.
Okay. Thanks, Jerry. Thanks for listening to AINdebrief. Another podcast episode will air next Friday. In the meantime, go to www.ainonline.com for the latest aviation news from AIN.